You have a brilliant question popping in here at the beginning, all right? All right. So, what? It's the 5th. Yeah, you can see the clock. Today's the 5th. We are in Unit 3, Part 2, the Enlightenment. So this is continuing with the Scientific Revolution. We'll be in Unit 4 with the French Revolution, as you can see from your note packets. So continuing on here. The Enlightenment is our intellectual and cultural movement, where our scientific revolution, of course, from its really, really fantastic name, was about science, math, those kind of things. We saw the emergence of a secular worldview for the first time in human history as opposed to religious, so we stopped looking through those Jesus glasses I showed you on the scientific revolution, and we are now going to start to look at things in a secular manner. The fundamental notion was that natural sciences and reason could explain all aspects of life. So instead of saying, what would Jesus do? Now we're going to say, what would science say the world's going to do? Belief in autonomy of man's intellect apart from God is also going to be part of this. That it's not that they don't believe in God, and we're going to talk about that. It's just that they don't believe you need God every day in every action. Most basic assumption is faith and reason rather than faith and revelation. That's probably my favorite saying from this time period, faith and reason rather than in revelation. And so deism is really the foundation of this, and I hit on this at the end of the scientific revolution. Deism is the religious arm of the Enlightenment. It is going to, take from that clock analogy that there is a God, and there's a rational explanation of the universe in its form. God was a deistic creator, meaning he's like a clockmaker. He makes the clock with all of these gears and these complex things, but once you've made a clock, you don't have to stand there and continue to watch it and monitor it. So deists are going to say God made the world working just the way it should with all these natural laws in place. He doesn't need to intervene all of the time. The universe was governed then by the natural laws that God created, and some called it the ghost in the machine. Okay, great song too, by the way. The supernatural was not involved in human life. So they would say all those little miracles and things like that is more in the human mind than it is in actuality. That God was a great clockmaker, so he does not need to step in. Deism, as we know, grew out of Newton's theories regarding natural law, but he didn't intend it to, really. He was a Christian. And so people are actually going to take his work and use it to promote deism, this clockmaker. We also have Baruch Spinoza, 1632 to 1677. He is a philosopher who created a worldview in which he equated God and nature. And so we are still going to see some people trying to put God into a place in the world alongside science.
What was Spinoza's date?
1632 to 1677. So instead of scientists in the Enlightenment, we are going to see that philosophers start saying that in taking the scientists from the scientific revolution, the scientific method, that they could also explain the laws of society. So if they're like natural laws govern science and nature, then natural laws also probably govern society. And because there's laws to it, we could probably then create an ideal society. And remember, this is the topic of our salon. And this Enlightenment thought is going to make people think, do I live in an ideal society? If I don't, how do I overthrow my society to make it ideal? And so keep that in mind. Progress in society in the Enlightenment was possible if natural laws and how they were applied to society could be understood. So the Enlightenment philosophers are going to say, if we can just understand how society works, we can fix it. Education was seen as a key to helping society to progress. And so this means that they also believe that you can continually move forward, which is an Enlightenment theme we'll look at. In that motion, education is key to the Enlightenment thinkers. So I always think Enlightenment, education, they go hand in hand. You must be well-versed to make change. right, so our first individual is someone that should be fairly familiar to you. John Locke, 1632 to 1704, dates up there. He gives us the two treatises on civil government in 1690. He's probably the best philosophical defense for the Glorious Revolution in England. He had lived through it. You remember the Glorious Revolution while we were there. And he is going to say that there's a reason for this happening. John Locke is a person that says we are, I think maybe I put all, yep, there you go, so you don't have to look back at your terms. So the first treatise of government, he is going to say that state of nature, and state of nature is probably something you want to underline. We're going to talk about most Enlightenment philosophers have an idea of what we are at our basic core. John Locke is going to be pretty kind to humans. He's going to say we're basically good, but that we lack protection or the ability to protect ourselves. And so in a state of nature, we'll be all good, but we don't know how to protect ourselves. This contrasts with Hobbes. Remember Hobbes that we looked at? View of humans. He said we were nasty and brutish and evil. So John Locke's going to say the opposite. It's not us, it's just that we need protection. And then the necessity, what's going to provide us protection, is a government. Governments provide rule of law, but only through the consent of the governed. So just a short way to say this, people get pretty complex with Locke. Locke says people are good, we need protection, good people are going to consent to being governed, which will provide them protection. And since they're good, they're going to elect good governments to protect their natural rights. This should sound very familiar to you because we based a lot of our, after our revolution, our Constitution, on John Locke's work because he wrote in 1690, just a time before our 1776. So, to protect our natural rights, which are life, liberty, and property, the government should protect others from taking these. Okay, we have these rights, and so others might come in and try to take them. Like you might say, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to steal this from you, and it's the government's job to protect my natural rights. However, if the government isn't protecting your natural rights to life, liberty, and property, you have the right to rebellion. It's a reserved right. It's almost as important as the natural rights. Sorry. So you have the right to an abolished government. This is where a lot of people who like to misuse Locke's work just stop. They abolish the government, and woo, there's nothing there. I'm going to put it, the dictator's going to take over. No, Locke would say that then once you've abolished that government, you must then agree, consent of the good people to develop a new government. Okay, it's not just a free-for-all. People have a right to abolish the government that doesn't protect their natural rights. He also gives us an essay concerning human understanding in 1690 that tells us you can create that new government that will support your rights. It's one of the great works of the Enlightenment, along with Newton's Principia that we looked at in the Scientific Revolution lecture that was on Edmodo. It stressed the importance of the environment on human development, and that, again, education is key. Okay? Education is key to everything. He's going to promote this topic called tabula rasa, which means he believes that we're born blank. Like if you think about like a blank chalkboard, we're not only born good, but we're born blank. And we learn everything that we know through the senses, passively, through the education that we're provided. And so he's going to say for progress to occur in society, we must form an education that is going to educate the youth on their natural rights, promote their goodness, and allow them to be good people to elect a government. It undermined the Christian view that humankind was essentially sinful, or that there was original sin. So we will see a challenge to the church here with John Locke. But that you're born with a blank slate, so no like headless babies in purgatory if you're not baptized. We're a blank slate until we're educated, so the education is the key part. Everyone get a chance to get all that down? Did I talk long enough to get it down? All right. So the idea of toleration, or I guess toleration is ideal, so it could work both ways. The idea of toleration is also going to be an important Enlightenment theme. It was popularized by many scholars who made the Enlightenment accessible to the public. Bernard de Fontenelle is going to make, I don't know, were you guys too Young for, oh, now I can't even think. The science guy, what's his, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Okay, because you were not, I guess. Evidently, I'm so old I forgot, so we're okay. You guys got it. So Bernard de Fontenelle is what I like to think about is that he's going to take all that crazy work. Have you guys tried to read Principia by Newton or any of these scientific revolution? Yeah, it makes my eye twitch too. But he's going to take that stuff and make it accessible to the public. He's going to make it entertaining. So kind of like that. I think of like those books too that are educational, like the Magic School Bus, that made like science like entertaining to you when you were a kid. This is what he does. He brings it to a broad audience. He stressed the idea of progress. He's very skeptical, however, of absolute truth. And he questions a lot of organized religions. He's like, how can any one person claim to have an absolute truth on anything? But so he's going to, out of that, not persecute others, just say, how can you persecute someone if you don't know you're right? So he promotes toleration. Pierre Bayle is going to give us Critical and Historical Dictionary in 1697. He's going to promote, he's going to like, so look, what's going on is every single religious group hates each other. So if we're going to continue like this, then maybe we should just stop. Throw in the towel where nobody's ever going to prove they're right. We're just going to keep killing people and advocate complete toleration of ideas. A person should be free to worship any religion. Religion and morality were not necessarily linked, so you could be a good person and not religious, or vice versa. He was a skeptic. He also believed nothing could be known beyond all doubt. And his major criticism was of Christianity and its attempt to impose orthodoxy, or that it forced people into things that they didn't have a chance to question for themselves. Okay, so religious toleration. When we get to enlightened despotism, religious toleration is one of the main things the enlightened despots are going to take from the Enlightenment philosophers and incorporate into their country, which will be really good, especially for the Jews who've been hanging out in some bad territory right now. So, the philosophes is just a French word for philosopher. They are, and just like our new monarchs and our absolute monarchs have characteristics, the philosophes have characteristics. They are committed to fundamental reform in society. They were extremely successful in popularizing the Enlightenment. They were like really good advertisers. The ones that like have... It's Ted or whatever from State Farm. Like they were able to make like catchy, like sell the Enlightenment. They're even going to become friends with some of our rulers and sell the Enlightenment that way. France, if you remember, is still the cultural center. It will then become the center of the Enlightenment. It's kind of ironic that almost every revolution took its key from the French intellectuals or philosophers, but yet when it came to accomplishing their own revolution, it goes very, very awry. By 1775, much of Western Europe's educated elite had embraced the Enlightenment, and that is the belief in progress through discovering natural laws governing nature and human existence. They were radically optimistic. Like, I would have fit in really well in this time period. Like, yeah, it'll all work. Let's all be happy. Everybody can tolerate. We've got this. Like, I would have been great in an Enlightenment salon. I'm just telling you. They don't believe in original sin. So the church is going to have a problem with this because the church has been telling people, you better watch out. You were born with all this sin. Like, life is just dismal. And now these Enlightenment philosophers are coming along. Life is good. Get educated. Be tolerant. You can learn. Yes, it's going to kind of put a chip on the shoulder of the church. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So Voltaire. Oh, I love Voltaire. Francois-Marie Arouet is his actual name, but he best known by Voltaire. He wrote 70 books in his lifetime, which I just think is impressive. You guys are kind of the upper echelon of high school students, so you've probably read 70 books, but if you think about it, most of your peers might not read 70 books in their lifetime. Especially some of the sophomores I run across that really like it's pulling teeth to get them to read an essay. So he wrote 70 books, so the time that takes. He was perhaps the most influential of all the Enlightenment philosophers. Not so much because his work was better. I would almost say it's better because I love satire, and he just rules it there. But it's because the rulers really liked him. Like, he even got himself into a ton of courts. like allowed to live there and was the influential person in our Enlightened Despotism era. And so it's really because he was really well liked by rulers. He wrote his criticisms with a sharp sarcasm that ridiculed those with whom he disagreed. Love that about Voltaire. He challenged traditional Catholic theology. He hated organized religion. Hated, hated, hated. Probably the biggest use of his sarcasm is against anything that has to do with the Catholic Church or Catholic theology. He had very strong deist views. God created this world, put it in motion, and stepped back. He is not involved with our daily life. He believed prayer and miracles did not fit with natural law, that those are things that were made up by the church. He believed that human reason was the key to progress in society, not religious faith. He thought that faith causes fanaticism. I used to incorporate a lot of pictures here. I was kind of sad to cut them. But I used to use faith and fanaticism to kind of show what Voltaire was talking about. Like people who are opposed to abortions, but then going and killing abortion doctors. Or people that are against cruelty to animals, but then are blowing up the owners of puppy mills. And then so he's saying if you have too much faith in one idea, it causes you to be fanatical and lose your mind in the natural law. So you're against killing, but you're going to kill. And so that's what fanaticism does. That's what Voltaire says. He kind of say the Middle East, every holy book says to not kill, but then they're killing over religion. He also would say, I think, if he were around today, that in the Ireland, the Protestants versus Catholics would be a very fanatic event based off of a faith. And so he's really anti-faith, prayer, miracles, etc. His social criticism inspired a call for change, setting the stage for the French Revolution. He hated bigotry and injustice and called for religious toleration. His most famous quote against religious intolerance was, "Crush that infamous thing." Also known for, but I don't think really said, although it sometimes get incorporated with him, I think it's kind of a mistranslation. "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." There are other philosophers that also had that turn of phrase in their work. So, although there's the crush the infamous thing, "Crusque l'infâme." And that's how he speaks about religion, crush that infamous thing. He advocated enlightened despotism, which we are going to get to, a more benevolent form of absolutism. So it's an absolute monarch like Louis XIV, but they're like, oh, but I like my people. People are good. I'm going to treat them well. But they still believe they have the absolute right to rule. He believing that people were incapable of governing themselves. These views were actually similar to Hobbes in this manner. Remember where Hobbes said you had to have a Leviathan or, this huge power? And so similar to Hobbes in the view of absolutism or absolute rule. His views are going to influence several enlightened despots, including Frederick the Great of Prussia, who invited Voltaire to live in his court in Berlin, Catherine the Great of Russia, Joseph II of Austria, and Napoleon of France. And we're going to get to all those, so don't worry about writing all of those down. He also really distrusted democracy, if I didn't say that already. He thinks people are actually quite stupid. He would say if you were educated properly, then you could, but he thinks most of the masses are not, and therefore they're too stupid to vote on their own. So they need an absolute ruler. All right, that brings us to Baron de Montesquieu. He is the member of the French nobility. He hated the absolutism of Louis XIV, so he's not a fan. He's going to kind of be our oddball here. He studied governments. He studied every kind of government. He went out and even tried to find new forms of government to figure out which one is the best. And in this journey, in this research, he writes The Spirit of the Laws in 1748. And he's going to say the best governments, kind of like what England had, the best places that are running the most efficiently are those governments that have a separation of power in their government. This should sound very familiar to you, later known as checks and balances. Okay, so it's going to highly influence our government. He believes that power in government should be split into three branches: monarchy, nobility, and the rest of the population. And the goal of this is to prevent tyranny and promote liberty. So this principle of checks and balances would ensure that no single branch of government became too powerful. And then if it did, the other two branches could check it. They could check it into place. He decided after his research that this was the best method because he favored the British system of a monarch, parliament, and independent courts. And he supported also the 13 parlements in France. Montesquieu's ideas, like I said, will have a significant impact on the creation of the U.S. Constitution. Yes? Oh, okay, go ahead. We're recording, so we'll just, if you can see the time up there, pick it up at 20 minutes, and we'll mark the time when you get back so you don't have to watch the whole shebang. I'll write that down so we don't forget. Angela made the lecture. 20 minutes to get back. All right. Yeah, so significantly impacted our Constitution. Satire, oh, I didn't put that in here. He also wrote this book called Persian Letters, and it's satirical. So what they would do is they make up these like fictional stories, and these Persians are then visiting France, and like, oh, this stuff is all messed up. And so they're talking about it. So he's like, oh, look, it's not me that's saying that. It's these fictional characters in a book. It's actually pretty good if you get a chance to see it. But it's very real to life of the big flaws that are coming up in the French Revolution. It would be something cool to kind of like drop in the salon if you had a quote or something from there. But a lot of these fictional books from this time have a much deeper meaning. So our next guy, Rousseau, 1712 to 1778. Another guy who's going to give us social contract. What are two others that have used the word social contract within their writing? Locke and grumpy or evil, brutish guy, Hobbes. Locke and Hobbes have also used social contract, but all of their social contracts mean something different. Rousseau's social contract is that if you believe that he believes that the ills of society are caused by too much of an emphasis on property and not enough consideration of people. And that's why we have all these social problems. And so for him, he believes that the social contract is called a general will, or a consensus of the majority should control a nation. So a consensus of the majority should control a nation. Make sure you have the word majority there. This strongly implied democracy, but if you are a group within this nation and you are not the majority, or your view is not the majority, your natural rights then aren't protected under Rousseau. So let's say you're a Jew, and we'll just say a Jew living in the time of Hitler in Germany. You're a significant amount of the population, correct? But the majority population would probably want to do what to you in Germany during World War II? Kill you. So you would have no right to stand up to that if the majority voted that your life should be taken away. So it doesn't take into account the general will of the minority viewpoint. It omits that. So that's a little bit of, I think, a flaw. Some others may not see it as a flaw. But the downside is minority viewpoints were not recognized. Though these ideas seem to support democracy, the ambiguous nature of general will, which really is a fancy word for vote, will later be manipulated by dictators who also think the same thing to rationalize extreme nationalism and tyranny. So they're going to say the general will, the vote, so people like Hitler are going to use that vote over and over again to say it was the general will of the people. Look at Rousseau and the social contract. It's going to be misused by dictators several times. He doesn't use as much reason as others. Although considered part of the Enlightenment, he is more accurately seen as the founder of the Romantic movement. After the French Revolution, the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason is going to give way to a glorification of emotion. You need to make a note right here. This will be a turning point we talk about. Anytime you have a real turn one way, like we're going all reason, everything is fact, everything is education, every time this happens in history, you will have a reactive movement. The reactive movement to the Enlightenment is going to be the Romantic movement. Then everything's going to, and oh man, when I teach Romanticism, that's the one I struggle with, because it's all like, everything's emotional, and we're just going to feel our way through life, and like, we don't think about it too much. Like, yeah, I'm not cynical about Romanticism at all. Anyway, so that's going to be the reaction to this rational thought. Rousseau is going to believe that the man in a simpler state of nature was good. So he's also going to think that, like, if the world was recreated tomorrow, we are naturally good. We are what he would call a noble savage. And we only get corrupted once people put materialism in our face, like make us want things. And he would say, so we're naturally good, but it's materialism that undoes us. He gives us Emily in 1762. He believed in progressive education, which means you learn by doing. So you like learn things by doing them. So that would mean when we were learning about something, we would come in and like recreate a machine from the Industrial Revolution. We would learn it by doing it. A lot of people really believe in this. Self-expression was encouraged, so you would be really encouraged to just stand up and disagree with a professor or teacher in class. You should self-express. I think it's really ironic that he believes education is key, like other Enlightenment philosophers, because he left all 5 of his illegitimate children in an orphanage to not be educated, because he was too busy writing papers and studying. So, education is key, but I don't have time for my kids. I will send them to a foundling hospital.
He's being educated.
Not in a foundling at this time. Yeah. They're just dropped off, and they'll be. Yeah, he gets to be educated. So his education's more important than his children. Yeah. So I just think it's kind of ironic, but tis the way with the backstory. All right. So next. Diderot, 1713 to 1784, is going to give us something you're maybe less familiar with. They used to come sell these door to door when I was a kid, encyclopedias. Let's put all of the knowledge of all of the things, of how things work in the world, into these volumes of books. Today, that would be your Wikipedia. Okay, so that's where you would kind of make that connection. He is perhaps the greatest and most representative work of the philosophs, because he is going to try to take all of the work and make it available. He's like really a good salesman. You guys watch Key and Peele? Yeah. Did you guys see the one that they just did on the French from this time period? If I get a chance, I watched it all the way through because I wanted to make sure they didn't cuss. I was like, sure in the last 2 seconds they were just going to like have a string of obscenities. But I'll try to put it on Edmodo for you. It's really funny about like this time period. Anyway, he put all of these philosophs' work together into one book and made it available to everyone. He helped to popularize the views of the philosophs by doing this. He emphasized science and reason while criticizing religion, intolerance, injustice, and tyranny. He sought to teach people to think critically and objectively. And his encyclopedia will actually be banned in France because the Pope placed it on the index of prohibited books because it included articles criticizing the church. You could actually be excommunicated if you were caught with this book or caught quoting it. From the Catholic Church, so you could be excommunicated. So, I say bravo. If I wrote a book that ever ended up on the index prohibited, I'd be like, woo, I did something. Like that's just my viewpoint. I don't know that he was too worried about it either. All right. So, Beccaria on crimes and punishment. 1764. He sought to humanize criminal law. My husband deals with this guy all the time. Like his work is still pulled out to address like what punishment is fair and like what's excessive when arresting or in court or when questioning someone on a crime. He based it off Enlightenment concepts of reason and equality before the law, that we should all be equal before the law. Some of the phrases that you're probably familiar with that will come from this that you should be thankful for today: that you were innocent until proven guilty, that you have a right to a trial, that law is based on reason instead of faith or religion. So people aren't calling you a witch because you know how to like grow an herb or something. Yes, ma'am.
Montesquieu doesn't like it when you're saying that law shouldn't have anything to do with the rules of God, because God should be able to maintain his own laws.
Yeah.
It's none of our business.
Yeah, it should be. And like if you think about it from like that comic, he set it into motion as obviously predetermined his laws, so who is man to say? Yeah, and so this would go like straight with that. He's going to say no longer should you be convicted of crimes such as heresy and things of that nature. God would take care of that on his own. He thinks punishment for a crime should fit the crime. It should be based rationally on the damage done to society. He opposed the death penalty except for serious threats against the state. Let's see. The government is to protect society and respect the dignity of someone accused of a crime, so like keeping, your information and all of those things. His views influenced the enlightened despots. We're going to actually see today Frederick the Great of Prussia banned torture. Catherine the Great is going to restrict the, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you say that the punishment is based on the crime, does that mean the severity, or does that mean if you steal bread, you get your hand cut?
No, like the severity. Yeah, so he's going to kind of undo some of those Hammurabi-esque, more of an eye, which weren't really an eye for an eye. Like, you accidentally poke someone's eye out, you lose your eye. Like, he's going to be like, oh, okay, it was a crime that had to do with stealing. You're going to pay a fine. But no physical harm should come to you. Now, if you've caused physical harm upon somebody else, you need to be kept away from society where you cannot harm others again. Yeah, so the severity of the crime. Also, no torture during, interviews and those sort of things for crimes or while being held before you're convicted. So Catherine the Great will restrict the use of torture. Joseph II is going to ban torture and the death penalty, but not necessarily other harsh punishments. Like, there's still going to be people hung from, they won't kill them, but it's really, really bad. Like, you'd want to be dead. So there's just side note there. So let's talk a little bit about economic theory, not too much. I mean, you will take economics if it's your thing. What we really just need to know is the impact that they've had, just like science. I'm not an economist, although I did like macro and microeconomics, but not here to do all of that for you. So we have Francois Quesnay, 1694 to 1774. We're going to start to see that these guys, these physiocrats, are going to say that if there's natural laws for science, there's natural laws for society, then there must be natural laws for economy as well. And this is going to start to lead us away from mercantilism. You need to make that a note here. This is a turning point. Mercantilism, which we have talked a great deal about, that control by a nation of its government to make it the strongest and to not allow gold and silver to go into other nations, is going to kind of go to the wayside here with our physiocrats, with our natural laws of economy. So, the leader of the physiocrats in France who opposed mercantilist policies is Quesnay. He is going to kind of like the head guy or the voice box for them. He sought to reform the existing agrarian system by instituting laissez-faire and agriculture. Does anybody know what that term translates to mean? Hands off. Hands off. So total opposite of mercantilism. The government is to keep their hands off stuff, where mercantilism was complete control by the government. He believed the French government and nobility had too much control over land, which stifled agricultural production. He was probably right, which is why the Industrial Revolution is going to happen way later in France. Well, and also because they were killing each other and building barricades, but we'll come to that in a minute. Anyway, so Adam Smith is going to continue this in his Wealth of Nations. I'll wait to change the slide. It looks like there's still some pins moving. Adam Smith is our next one. He is a Scot. He is Scottish. He's going to give us the Wealth of Nations in 1776, which should be a familiar year to you. It's considered the Bible of capitalism, and he is going to refine and expand laissez-faire. He does not create it. He refines and expands it. And it's really going to be the do what you want to do. I don't know, in some countries, if you really excel at ice skating, they're like, you ice skater. Whole life, you're our ice skater. Whereas you're like, no, I don't want to be an ice skater. I want to bake something. So he's gonna really promote this, do what you want to do. So there's nations at this time that are controlling still the jobs that you have. He believed the economy is governed by the natural law of supply and demand. He would call this natural law the invisible hand. Okay. Supply and demand is just that simple term that you've had probably in personal finance. Was that freshman year for you guys? Sophomore year, freshman year, personal finance? Yeah. Supply and demand. The more of a product you have, the lower the cost. So if there's a whole bunch of something, the price is going to be lower. If it's wanted, though, a lot, like the new iPhone 6, the price is going to go up, even if there's a ton of them, even if they're not going to sell out. If there is less of a product, like they have only made this many of something, then the price goes up. If there is less need for a product, then the price goes down. And so this is just a natural thing he would say happens. This is and the meeting point, like if you had a cool little graph for personal finance, the meeting point of this supply and demand is where the actual price should be, what it should actually cost for something. In a free market economy, competition will encourage producers to manufacture more efficiently so that they can sell a higher quality good, which is good for all of us, and at a lower price, and that government regulation should only interfere with the natural self-governing style. Okay, so a lot of hands off. So I told you, economics, that's it for us. That's how it impacted it. Mercantilism is going to go to the wayside. All right, women in the Enlightenment. I think the old white guys at AP Euro got in trouble for not including enough women, so they love women on the AP Euro exam. If you can trace women from the beginning and compare them in a time period, you have probably mastered one of the FRQ. Not probably, you have. A question about women will come up in one of the FRQs for sure. So just pay attention to them throughout, and we are going to pay attention to them as a class throughout. So women in the Enlightenment. Women were mediators and organizers during the Enlightenment. They didn't get to be so much participants, but they are really important behind the scene. They are going to take all of these teachings and turn it into something really great, or like allow it to form. And that's what we're going to participate in, which is a salon. Women played a major role in the salon movement. Many of the brightest minds of the Enlightenment assembled in salons to discuss the major issues of the day. Salons are like parlors or like living rooms. So they would just join at houses. We are also going to get a new art movement encouraged by the femininity of these women behind the salon movement. It's called Rococo, which we're going to talk about later. Very like flowery, it's pretty. Very pastels, things like that. So certain women organized salons and took part in the discussions. Madame de Joffrin is who I am playing in our Enlightenment salon. She is one of the hostesses with the mostest. So I will be her. She hosted events all through the week. Like the artists would be on a Monday. Then you would see like the people of letters is what she called them, the writers, on Wednesday. And it's quoted to be said about her, all of Europe stood around her chair. And she had that many salons. She had that much influence on what was going on. Madame de Staël is another one, Louis de Warren's. But I would say Joffrin played a major role in patronizing Diderot's encyclopedia, which is why she was so influential. Like, she really got that encyclopedia out there. Madame de Staël is later going to bring German romantic ideas into France, but it's mainly Madame de Joffrin that the early Enlightenment ideas are going to come through. The philosophers favored increased rights and education for women, which is probably why the women were so helpful in being mediators and spreading the work. In England, Mary Wollstonecraft, 1759 to 1797, is going to promote political and educational equality for women. She is a teacher. She gives us a vindication of the rights of women. She is actually, if you've ever read Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's mother. And so, yeah. So you can definitely see some of the same things. Like, they both suffered from depression, but both very intellectual, both in a very man-dominated world. So, and you definitely can see some of the underlying feminist tones in Frankenstein if you're looking for them. So there's our women. If you could do an FRQ on the influence they had on the part that they played as facilitators in the Enlightenment, and we'll come back to them more. But we need to talk about how the Enlightenment changes really quickly. So by the late 18th century, we're going to start to see that the Enlightenment is going to become more and more skeptical. And in the case of Hume and de Holbach, even atheistic. So we're going to see that deism, where they're acknowledging there's a God, that he's just not present in every day, turn into atheism. Baron Paul Holdenbach gave us a system of nature. He argued humans were essentially like machines and completely determined by outside forces, or determinism. We're just like little cogs, little robots, and we don't have a say. We just go through the function that the natural laws are driving us to do. His staunch atheism, determinism, and attacks on Christianity actually undermined the Enlightenment, because people are going to be like, that guy's crazy. Like, if he's part of the Enlightenment, I don't want any part of that. And so he's actually going to play a role in undermining or allowing some of the Enlightenment ideals to fade away. Hume argued against faith in both natural law and faith. In general, as a skeptic, Hume claimed that human ideas were merely the result of sensory experiences. Thus, human reason could not go beyond what was experienced through the senses. So all we are is our like five senses. Like that's all we are or we're ever going to be. He's an outlier. He has no faith in faith and no faith in reason. So he's very different than our other Enlightenment thinkers as well. Jean de Cortazet gave us Progress of the Human Mind. He was a utopian, and so he also undermined the legitimacy of the Enlightenment because he was way out there. If you know anything about utopianism, we're going to talk about it. Not one utopian society has succeeded in human history. So if you build a utopian commune and it works, give me a call. Rousseau is going to actually attack rationalism and civilization as destroying rather than liberating the individual. So he's going to react to this, and remember that's because he influences the Romantic movement. He believed in a more loving and personal God. So he's going to be an outlier as well, even though he's not as far out as these others. Immanuel Kant is the greatest German philosopher of the Enlightenment, and he is going to separate science and morality into separate branches of knowledge. Science could describe nature, but it could not provide a guide for morality. So he's saying science has no part in what is right and wrong. The natural laws don't apply to everything. All right, and I think that's all there. I'll give you a second to write down. I'm just going to skim through this stuff. Classical liberalism's next. We don't have to go into great depth there. It's going to grow out of the Enlightenment. Yes, sir. Yeah, go ahead. Pretty good? All right, classical liberalism is a political outgrowth of the Enlightenment, belief in liberty of the individual and equality before the law. This is all stuff we've talked about. It's just a result of those ideas. Natural rights, Locke and Montesquieu, Rousseau and General Will, Adam Smith in the Invisible Hand, belief in progress. All of this is just summarizing the effect of the Enlightenment. So that human beings can actually get better, that we can do all of these things, education, religious toleration. We're going to see that you don't have to rewrite all this down because it should all be in your notes. Do you guys need a second here? Okay. We're also going to see new Christian groups are going to form that oppose the Enlightenment because of the secular and deist views of the Enlightenment causes a pretty big reaction among some Christian leaders who believe that this was an attack on Christian spirituality. We'll see this in German Pietism, Methodism, and Jansenism, which we've talked about a little bit, that Catholic sect in France that had been persecuted by Louis XIV. Not too big ideas here. Am I okay to flip? We need another second. Okay. All right, and that's just the different groups. If you want to put down German Pietism, you probably have gotten through the gripes of this lecture. The church isn't going to be very happy with some of the Enlightenment. That's really all you need to know. Oops. All right, so the impact of the Enlightenment. This is all of it in a nutshell. So if you wanted to know the effect, we know the cause. The scientific revolution caused the people to think there were natural laws in society and economics. This is the effect. Impact of the Enlightenment, the emergence of a secular worldview. We're going to talk about enlightened despotism here in Prussia, Russia, Austria, and finally with Napoleon. The American and French Revolution as a result of that classical liberalism. Educational reform in various countries. And the growth of laissez-faire capitalism in the 19th century during the early Industrial Revolution in England and especially in 19th century America. And here is where we're going to move into enlightened despotism. Question for you, would you like a break to stand, to get water, to go to the restroom? I think I can get in through enlightened despotism in like 15 minutes, maybe 20, and then spend the rest for work time? Or would you rather me save it as the intro to the French Revolution lecture video?
We should do it now.
Okay, now? Now I have 2 votes for now? Now? Okay, do we want a small break? Okay, so we'll just write down the time that you go to your club video. You'll want to pick up on this video there on Edmodo. So nobody's against and nobody needs a break. All right. I'll go as fast as I can. All right. Enlightened despotism. And I just thought that this crown was pretty, so just bear with me. So enlightened despotism. Just like new monarchs, just like absolute monarchs, enlightened despots have unique characteristics that tie them all together, that make them the same even if they're in different places. Okay? 1740 to 1790 is the time period we're talking about. The philosophers had inspired and supported the reforms of the enlightened despots. They have inspired them and then will continue to support them. Voltaire and Diderot are really pushed the idea of enlightened despotism. They are the biggest advocates. They believed absolute rulers should promote the good of the people. So your job as an absolute ruler was to protect your people because they are innately good, even though Voltaire would say stupid. They believe, like Hobbes earlier, that people were not capable of ruling themselves. So although Hobbes thinks we're brutish and evil and nasty, they all agree that we are not capable of being left alone. Okay, it's kind of like that, freshman classroom that you wouldn't dare leave the room to go to the bathroom as a teacher. Like, you can't, like, you're not leaving them alone. They look at their people, then, enlightened despots, as an absolute ruler, like their people are their children. Yes?
So, enlightened despotism, is that the same thing as enlightened absolutism?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Very good. Good question. So an enlightened despot or an enlightened absolutist would look at their people like they are their children. Their kingdom is their children. You don't know what is best for yourself. So I will show you. I will help you. I will help you make this decision. That's really kind of what it is. There's only one group that's different, and that, again, is Rousseau. He's an emotionalist. He's the only one that thinks that this won't work. He does not believe in an absolute monarch, Rousseau. He's still our outlier. So, what's going to happen because of these enlightened despots and the philosophers' push behind them? We are going to see some reforms during the Enlightenment. All right, the reforms were modest, however. They aren't going to go like really big. They're going to be just some little changes. Absolute monarchs, and I'm kind of cynical at this, I think call themselves, enlightened despots. I think I'm a little cynical, but I think they go to some of these things just as a method to control their people. Like, if you like me, I can take more from you or make you do more. But maybe that's just my cynicism. Anyway, first thing, religious toleration. One of those key things of the Enlightenment is going to be pushed in enlightened despots' nations. They're going to streamline legal codes, or legal codes that make sense. They're going to increase access to education. And they're going to have the reduction or elimination of torture and the death penalty. So we'll see all of these things in different degrees under each of these rulers. These are the characteristics they share in common, just like we had the characteristics of an absolute monarch, or we had the characteristics of a new monarch. This is the characteristics of an enlightened despot and their reforms. Our first is going to be Mr. Frederick the Great, or Frederick II, who was the answer D for number 19, which was incorrect on your test. Just a reminder to check that to get your point. So, Frederick the Great, Frederick II, he is the son of the Soldier King. So, I don't know that would have been the most fun, and we'll talk about how it wasn't. His nickname is Old Fritz. I don't know if I told you that the German nickname for Frederick is Fritz. Did I? Did I not in here? Okay, Fritz. His nickname is Old Fritz. Background on him. He will become one of the greatest rulers in German history, or is one of the greatest rulers in German history. The son of Frederick William I, the Soldier King, who is going to, whether Frederick wanted it or not, give him a very strong military education. He's very different than his father in the beginning. He likes to play the flute. He is into reading. He's obsessed with anything French. At age 18, however, it is said that he was formulating a plan to go visit his, who he's engaged to, his bride in England. And he has his best friend, some say actual lover, his best friend, a gentleman, help him plan this. Well, they did not tell his father, and everything went through the approval of the Soldier King. The plan kind of falls apart, and the Soldier King finds out, and at first he's just going to have his son's best friend, maybe / lover, killed. But then he decides to take Advisors try to talk him out of it, but obviously they weren't very good advisors because he kind of goes the other way with it. Then instead of just having him assassinated like away from the scenes, he actually has his son, makes his son be present as he decapitates his best friend and maybe lover for this plan to go to England. And he's going to just pretty much tell him, toughen up. Or this is gonna be, this will be like, so he does, like Frederick really does toughen up after this. It's gonna be, I don't know if this is so much legend or totally true, but it's been in multiple sources that he had 6 horses shot out from underneath of him in battle and lived to like fight on, never like, he's like the epitome of like getting back on the horse. So he like really does toughen up. He was, however, still profoundly influenced by the Enlightenment. He considered French learning to be superior. He patronized Voltaire and invited him to live in his court in Berlin, although they will end up having a fight and Voltaire's going to leave, but he still stays enlightened. He even writes a book called The Anti-Machiavelli, which he says Machiavelli had it all wrong with this being feared and being crafty kind of thing, that you should be loved. But again, I think there's that ulterior motive to kind of get your people to do what you want. But his soldier king father did get him to be a great warrior because...
The Hickman Music Society has a 330 list of club photos. Hickman Music Society, 330 in the old gym.
Okay. Because for the first 23 years of Frederick's reign will be dominated by warfare. So whatever his dad did will definitely, I think it affected him for life. He definitely learned something from his dad or was totally psychologically like messed up. Anyway, the War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, cause. If you need to know the cause, it was the invasion and annex of Silesia. He invaded and annexed Silesia, part of the Austrian Habsburg Empire. Remember, there had been that agreement that Maria Theresa could rule, even though she was a woman, and that these lands could not be separated. Well, that was in the Pragmatic Sanction. And Frederick's going to go, I don't think she should get to rule it, and I want it. So he goes in and invades. He violates Austria's Pragmatic Sanction, the deal that had been made in the Holy Roman Empire that she could rule. And remember, that was Charles VII's daughter. And the Habsburg Empire. And Prussia, because we know their military was awesome, the soldier king's son, is going to efficiently defeat Austria. So they mean pretty much just come in and take it. And they totally defy this whole treaty that had been put in place. And this is going to end up in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, where Prussia gained Silesia and doubled Prussia's population in the process. Like overnight, Prussia's population doubled. And they've taken this rich territory. Prussia was now recognized as the most powerful of all the German states and as one of Europe's great powers. So you want to put an effect here is the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, and the balance of power is going to be upset in Europe again. And these politics are going to come into play because now Prussia has gained too much power. That's all you really need for the War of Austrian Succession, that it violated the Pragmatic Sanction caused by Frederick the Great, and it's resulted in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. The next war, the 7 Years' War, the cause of this is Maria Theresa is going to say, there was a whole thing, I got promised this, I should be the ruler here, and she is going to try to regain Silesia from Prussia. And she is going to go after some very odd allies, people that normally wouldn't have been allied with Prussia. She's going to go for Russia and France. The goal of Austria, Russia, and France was to conquer Prussia and divide its territories among the winners. Here's that balance of power. They will come together to make sure the balance of power is protected, even if they don't like each other. And so the effect of this is going to be, and this is called the Diplomatic Revolution. I didn't put that in there. Sorry, guys. The Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. Diplomatic because they've never come together like this before. Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. France and Austria have been traditional enemies. Remember, France had been trying to keep the Habsburg Empire down and all separated? Oh, and Britain is even going to come in as who had been a traditional ally of Russia and support Prussia with money. So we're going to have all kinds of wonky allies here that we won't see really again and haven't seen before. Because Britain doesn't like France, so they're going to come in and go against their normal ally to go against France. This is the bloodiest war in Europe since the 30 Years' War of the 17th century. the bloodiest war in Europe since the 30 Years' War in the 17th century. And because Britain and France get involved in this against each other, this becomes a little war in America called what? The French and Indian War. Very nice. It transfers over here. It gets known as the French and Indian War here. Prussia, outnumbered by its enemies 15-1, suffered 180,000 dead. Berlin was twice captured. Really what you need to know right here is there's a turning point. Russian Tsar Peter III becomes the Tsar during the 7 Years' War, and he decides to pull Russia out of the war because he's an admirer of Frederick the Great. So he doesn't want to go against him. So he decides to pull Russia out of the war, and this saves Prussia from almost certain defeat. Peter III that we're going to see is going to be assassinated for this. Does anybody know who Peter III's wife was? Catherine the Great. So yeah, this is going to play into some pretty cool politics. Catherine and the military are actually going to end up assassinating Peter III for him pulling Russia out of this war. And so that's going to lead to that. But mainly what you need to know is the effect of this is the Treaty of Paris, 1763. This is a key date. Treaty of Paris, 1763. It's the most important peace treaty of the 18th century and the most important since the Treaty of Westphalia. Yes, ma'am.
What was the date you said for the diplomatic revolution?
I think, did I say 1756? So 1763, Treaty of Paris. Most important. Prussia is permanently going to retain Silesia from this point forth in history. And over here, this is going to, only leave some remnants of the French in America. France lost all of its colonies in North America to Great Britain. So if you looked at a map, and the AP Euro loves to put an American map on the AP Euro test that shows North America divided between between Great Britain and Spain. If you see a map on the AP Euro test and it's half Spain and half Great Britain, and there's no French there, they're talking about the Treaty of Paris. Just mark Treaty of Paris. So we read the question, Treaty of Paris. They like to put this map on there, and the kids always come back like, there was a question about U.S. history. Anyway, Britain is going to gain more territory in India as well, so we're going to see the heightening of Britain here. So, enlightened reforms of Frederick the Great. Why we're really talking about him. He called himself the servant of the state. Very different than saying I am the state, right? He calls himself a servant of the state. He says, my job is to make people happy. He is going to allow religious freedom, although less so for the Jews. So he pretty much says that everyone really believes in like a heaven except for the Jews, and so we're all going to get there somehow, but that's his reason for still kind of persecuting them. Whatever. He promoted education in schools and universities, especially French learning. He codified and streamlined laws, which are going to be called the Prussian Code. He is going to free the serfs on crown lands, so only the serfs on his lands, on the crown, the lands that the crown holds in 1763. So you could put a side note here with freed serfs that serfdom remained in full force on noble estates, although Frederick ordered an end to physical punishment of serfs by their lords. So he ordered an end to physical punishment, but he only released the serfs that were on the monarch's land, on his land. He's going to improve state bureaucracy by requiring examinations for civil servants. He's going to reduce censorship, so you're not getting killed for writing something against the crown. He's going to abolish capital punishment, but not in the army. Like if you desert the army, you are still getting killed if you were caught. He encouraged immigration, and he encouraged industrial and agricultural growth. The social structure in Prussia, however, you can just write pretty much stays the same. Even with his reforms, our structure is going to stay the same. Serfdom on noble lands is maintained. The Junkers, which are the Prussian nobility, are going to stay at the very top of Prussian social status. All the power is kept in the upper class. Okay, so the Junkers at the very top. And what you need to know about our very little middle class is they found it extremely difficult to move up in society. They're pretty much stuck unless they become a lawyer. That is about the only way out or to move up. So just a little note about society there. All right, and so now the lady who is has undone some things that we just told this story about, Miss Catherine the Great in Russia. She is actually also one of the greatest rulers in European history, and, however, probably the least enlightened of the enlightened despots. She still gets to be called one, but she definitely isn't at the top. She was actually a German princess, and how she came to be in Russia is her mom was actually related to the Romanovs, so she gets married into the family here, and she gets to become queen after her husband Peter III was assassinated during the 7 Years' War we just talked about. So the story of this goes, because he pulled out of the 7 Years' War, and there's kind of a whole backstory. First of all, this is an older picture of her, but she was very beautiful. Peter III, not good looking. Older, he had had smallpox, so he has like all the pox marks, and he wasn't good looking to begin with. So she takes on a lover very early. She was 15 when she married him, and she takes on a lover, and his name is Gregory Olaf, and he is a head military leader. And so the military gets all pissed off at Peter because he pulls out of the 7 Years' War, and they're going to throw a coup. So she decides this is her time, and plus her lover is the head of this coup. So he helps organize the assassination, or the arrest and assassination of her husband, and she helps arrange it as well and pull this off. And the reason that it doesn't go to one of the children is Peter the Great had actually abolished the succession of hereditary czars. So Peter the Great was so great. When he was ruling, he had decided that he wanted to appoint which of his children could be the czar instead, and so this is still on the books. And so since no one is appointed, since she's the wife, she kind of steps in line and was part of this coup. And she will actually take on many other lovers in her lifetime, but she will always keep Olaf at the very top of her military list, or at the very top position, because she remembers what he did for her. But anyway, so that's kind of the story about how Catherine the Great came to be Catherine the Great and becomes the queen. And so she is a lover of French culture. She actually refused to speak German or Russian and considered herself a child of the Enlightenment. So right off the bat, you're like, why is she the least enlightened despot? Well, something's going to happen. And that something that's going to happen is called the Pugachev Rebellion. Okay? Diderot even lived in her court for some time, and like she was right along the way of like probably maybe being the most enlightened, but she has something that like really changes her viewpoint. Eugene Pugachev, a Cossack soldier. So if you remember, the Cossacks are these like peasant rebellion outlaw soldiers who were going to lead an uprising. Did you have a question, Laura? They kind of fled.
Yeah, was that the bombing of the run? Was that because I know it was a Russian subgroup, wasn't it?
Yes.
Was that
Yeah.
the Cossack?
Yeah, the Cossack is going to play all these outer fringe movements. Remember, we had just pushed him all the way out in our last unit in absolutism, and so he's going to be there. But he takes advantage of this Peter the Great thing, and you know, there's no internet, there's no news, so people didn't really know what Peter III looked like because it's so big. And so he claims to be the rightful czar. He's like, no, they didn't kill me. They just put me all the way out here with you like a peasant soldier. And so some people are like, oh, maybe he is. Maybe he is Peter. And he's going to lead this huge serf uprising. He's going to demand an end to serfdom, taxes, and mandatory army service. They are going to kill about 3,000 landlords and officials in southwestern Russia. And he is going to be eventually captured and executed, even though capital punishment wasn't allowed. They didn't say, we didn't really try to kill him. They hung him by those big butcher hooks through his ribs, and he just accidentally died. Because you could live through that, yeah. Anyway. How she is enlightened, however, this will always affect her, though. She becomes very leery of the serfs, of the peasants. Like, she is like all against them now, so she kind of stops being this is enlightened to all of her people. She'll be really enlightened to the nobility. Under Catherine, nobility is going to be at their height, but serfs are going to be at their least, because she's really affected by this. Just like Louis XIV was really affected by the Fronde and always mistrusted the nobility, this is kind of opposite. So what she did do that was enlightened, she imported Western culture that had been started by Peter the Great. She listened to Voltaire. She had educational reforms. They went from publishing 40 books a year to 400, which is pretty significant. Lowered some censorship. She had a school for noble girls founded. She restricted the practice of torture, although not butcher hooks. Allowed limited religious toleration. Jews are finally going to be granted civil equality. She strengthened local government by elective councils, but she did have some pretty significant shortcomings. Only the state and nobility benefited during her rule. The rest of the Russian population benefited little, if at all. Serfdom became the most severe it has been. Okay, so definitely not a good time to be a serf. She will expand while she is in power, though. Territorial growth under Catherine the Great, they're going to annex Polish territory into 3 partitions with Prussia and Austria. Because Poland, if you remember from our student presentations, had the Liberian veto, where just one person could stand up and object and nothing got passed. So they're very weak right now. Russia is getting stronger, and now they are upsetting the balance of power in Europe. And so we will talk about that. It's going to start to worry Austria. And who's the ruler of Austria that we've been talking about, who has not been so happy? Another lady. Yeah, Maria Theresa. And Austria. She is not an enlightened despot. Circle this, underline this. She is only here because she's in charge at the same time. And we've already talked about this. She had been put in charge because of the pragmatic sanction of 1713 issued by her father, and agreed that her throne wouldn't be taken, which we already know that they attempt to do, and she's involved in the War of Austrian Succession. We've already talked about. What is important about her, though, is that she is still going to be able to centralize the control of the Habsburg Empire, even after all of this. She did more to help the condition of the serfs than any other ruler in European history up to that time. Only her son, Joseph II, did more. So although she's not an enlightened despot, she definitely did have some reforms that helped the serfs. She was quoted for saying, "Sheep must be well fed if they are to produce for you wool and milk." And so that's her talking about her people. So helps out the serfs. She brought the Catholic Church in Austria under state control. She promoted economic development. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. I'll keep talking, but the other things will be on the slide when I change. You'll have some time to write there. However, like I said, she is not considered an enlightened despot. She was not a fan of the Enlightenment. She did not think it was a good thing. She did not go as far as others in allowing religious toleration. However, her son will, and we're going to talk about that. And her son is Joseph II, if you didn't have that down. Yeah. So who's Joseph II in here for the salon? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. And here's the things I just said, too, if you didn't already have those down. Maria Theresa continued. And her son, Joseph II, is coming right up. And he's our last one. Okay, so Joseph II is actually going to rule with his mother, Maria Theresa, as a co-regent until her death in 1780. He is perhaps the greatest of the enlightened despots. So his mother not being one, he is actually one of the greatest in terms of reforms. But actually, because he was so great at reforms, it makes him the least effective. And I know that sounds like counterintuitive, but because his reforms were so big, they will actually have to be like overturned after his ruling because the country wasn't ready for reforms this big. He kind of just jumps past all of the like little steps and just boom. And so he goes a little bit too big, too big. He was deeply influenced by the Enlightenment and its emphasis on reforms, firm believer in absolutism, and he could be ruthless in achieving it. He kind of got lost in the process. Once he had his mindset on a goal, he just like had to get there no matter if it wasn't going to be really feasible. His major reforms are that he abolished serfdom and feudal dues in 1781. So he completely abolishes serfdom and the dues, the feudal society that was still remaining. This will be totally rescinded after his death. And ironically, a lot of the peasants didn't like him because they had been working on these farms, and so they had these little huts to live in, and so they only paid for what they needed with their work, but now they had to pay for things with cash that they did not have, so he was actually kind of disliked by their Lord. So, he gave freedom of religion and civic rights to Protestants and Jews. He allowed freedom of the press to a significant degree. He reformed the judicial system and sought to make it equal for all citizens. He abolished torture and ended the death penalty. He expanded state schools, meaning he trained people to participate in government. He established hospitals, insane asylums, poorhouses, and orphanages, made parks and gardens available to the public. But the empire is actually going to decline under his reign because he is so obsessed. Like, I think he gets really obsessed on his projects. So obsessed with what's going on at home and these reforms, he is going to lose or be defeated by other nations in this time because he's not paying enough attention to foreign policy. Austria is going to defeat him several times in wars. Austria is defeated by the Ottoman Empire, so say he is Austria, by the Ottoman Empire several times. Austria and Netherlands in revolt. Russia was threatening Austria's interest in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. And Leopold II will be forced to reverse many of Joseph's radical reforms in order to maintain effective control of the empire. And so his brother Leopold II is going to come in and undo pretty much everything that Joseph did in his time because the nation's kind of falling apart. And our next enlightened despot, or some historians would say, will be Napoleon, that we will talk about after the French Revolution. And so that is it. Thank you for hanging in there, guys. It gives you less to watch this weekend.